Well, it's time to welcome everyone to today's session, providing quality compliant training. This presentation is part of a series of webinars offered by the IPAF North American Regional Council to support users of mobile elevated work platforms, MEWPs, to meet their responsibilities for the safe and productive operation of this equipment. This session is being recorded today and will be available to all who have registered for your future use. There's a question and answer box on your screen that all of you are able to enter any questions you may have during the presentation, and those questions will be answered at the end of today's session as time allows. We're privileged today to have two industry subject matter experts presenting. Lee Braden, United Rentals Manager of Safety Training, and Bart Kristofik, Skyjack's Product Safety Manager. We'd like to thank our sponsor for today, Skyjack, who is making today's presentation possible for all of you to be presenting. And now, a word from our sponsor. Wow, it makes you want to go out and order equipment. Let's first start our presentation today. So we're going to turn it over to Lee Braden, who will begin our presentation. Lee, over to you.
Thank you, Tony. Well, thanks again to Skyjack for supporting today's program, and thank all of you for being with us today. Our first slide begins with some information on the importance of training employees. As technology advances and workplace methods and strategies improve, there comes a time when employers must recalibrate their workforce to keep up with industry changes. One of the best ways to enhance knowledge and skills is through training. Getting employees exposed to relevant and consistent training can help companies improve their performance and increase results in the workplace. Despite the cost of training for these employees, the return on the investment is substantial if the training is delivered consistently. Some of the reasons why include when employee training programs improve the knowledge and skills of employees to match the changes in the industry, the improvements will positively affect productivity, which increases the profits and the efficiency of the organization. When an organization's employee performance appraisals suggest the need for improvement on a particular subject or skill, training programs help satisfy this requirement. Training programs can also help prepare employees who are moving into higher roles and taking on much more responsibilities in the organization. These programs will help them learn the skills that are required to function effectively in their new positions. Implementing training programs in the workplace will help employees feel like the company is invested in them. And by continuing to teach your employees new skills and abilities, they will not just become better workers, they will feel like more productive members of the organization. This will improve the morale as well as their workplace capabilities. So next is about the value of standardized training. Today, the quality of safety training varies across our industry. First is the skill set of the trainer. There's a wide range of teaching experience as well as industry experience for those leading safety training. Second, some training courses offered do not satisfy regulatory requirements. And third, the duration of training often varies. For example, some teach operator certification classes in 4 hours. Some offer to teach the same program in 1 hour. There's a statement of best practices of general training and familiarization for aerial work platform equipment was created a number of years ago by industry consortium, including IPAF, ARA, SIA, and others. The document states that MEWP training should consist of 3 to 6 hours or more, depending upon the class size and the number of equipment classifications to be covered. This best practice for quality learning applied when this document was created, and it is equally as important today. The industry is telling us that operators sent out to complete training in 1 hour or 2 is substantially inadequate. The training you provide your workers must meet the objectives of the ANSI CSA training standard. The training standard is a level of quality that is accepted as a norm. Anything above or below this level is above or below the training standard. Becoming familiar with the standard allows a person to identify between standardized, above standard, or substandardized training. And remember, training always must be facilitated by a qualified AWP equipment instructor. The value of training. Good training programs will help employees get acquainted with their organization's ethics, values, policies, visions, and missions quickly, resulting in the entire team working towards a common goal. Training helps to standardize work processes on the job site, bringing consistency and uniformity to the projects. When an organization needs new leadership skills, they don't have to go into the labor market to recruit from outside sources. They can look inward and select promising staff members who can be promoted after they're trained in the new skill. And with the ever-increasing change in technology across all industries, exposing new employees to new techniques and advanced technology will help to increase the efficiency and productivity in the organization. Customers will feel the impact of this elevated service. It will improve your company's reputation within the industry, resulting in a competitive advantage. Standardized training provides the ability for managers to evaluate employees consistently across a variety of roles. When operators receive substandardized training, they are more likely to make errors that result in accidents, equipment damage, and downtime. Proper training improves the employee's skills and knowledge of the job. It builds confidence in their abilities and will improve their performance, making them work more efficiently and effectively. Efficient operators equates to more productivity and increased profits. Within training, employees will learn to make good, safe, and economical use of the company's materials, tools, and equipment. Accidents will be minimized, keeping workers' compensation insurance rates low, and material waste will be decreased as well. Additionally, employees of organizations who go through training programs will feel like they are part of a supportive work environment where they are appreciated, which will boost their morale and make them approach their job duties in a more self-confident and appreciative manner. Employees remain within the organization longer, meaning less employer or employee turnover. Customers will feel the impact of this elevated service, and it will improve your company's reputation within the industry, resulting in a competitive advantage. Cross-training increases scheduling flexibility, improves employee engagement and satisfaction, and potentially improves your firm's support of customers and overall performance. And finally, although training employees should not totally eliminate the need for supervision, it can significantly reduce the need for excessive supervision in the workplace. When a company has an organized system of training, it helps employees learn in a safe, consistent, and systematic way. Standardized training creates a balanced atmosphere in the organization, allowing every employee to feel valued and welcome. High potential employees are not satisfied with the status quo. Creating a training development plan enables employees to increase their personal growth and rise within the organization. Following best work practices and understanding the job site hazards transform the work site to a safe work environment for employees to go about their job tasks. Training will help employees be more productive in the workplace, creating job satisfaction. And it creates job enrichment opportunities for long-term employees by mentoring new employees. Customers place value on outsourcing projects to companies with a well-trained workforce. Examples include training provides safe, efficient employees, which will surely improve completion times, quality, and reduce overall cost to the projects. Well-trained workers bring less risk to the job site. They have been trained to identify hazards, evaluate risk, create control measures, and communicate results with all affected employees. In short, they know precisely who they are, their strengths, abilities, and potential, and areas of improvement. Their self-awareness better positions them to be strong and candid communicators, mentors, soundboards for lessons learned and best practices, and pillars of patience in times of change or disruption. Customers know that well-trained workers bring more for less. Cross-trained workers are multi-skilled and adaptable. Many customers prefer to work with organizations that focus on business models that emphasize smart, lean operations and employees who can wear many hats. Lastly, cross-training can dramatically reduce many of the indirect project costs working on out-of-town or remote projects. So who needs training? Operator training has been the primary focus for MEWP training in the past, continues to be very important today. New training standard now requires operators to ensure all other occupants have a basic level of knowledge needed to work safely on the aerial lift. This knowledge does not give an occupant authorization to operate the controls at any time, except in an emergency. Training requirements have also been expanded to include supervisor training for any persons assigned by the user to plan, supervise, or manage temporary work at height when working with mobile elevated work platforms. Supervisor training courses covers what supervisors need to know regarding the rules, regulations, and standards that apply to MEWPs for their safe and effective use, including selecting the right equipment, compliance with manufacturers' operating manuals, mitigating all possible risks from potential hazards, training and familiarization, and the work being performed. Under operator qualification, there's additional wording has been added to the new training standard. The intent was to add more clarity, but the meaning of most items should remain unchanged from the previous revisions of the standard. For example, the two definitions on the slide for training and qualified person are not new, but the additional wording highlighted in red may assist in understanding the language in the standard. Training enables one to become qualified, and a qualified person must successfully demonstrate their abilities. The important new language makes it clear that it is the user's or employer's responsibility to ensure the operator is both physically and mentally capable to operate a MEWP and assess if they are qualified to perform the task prior to authorizing them to operate. So as an example, should we assume that because an operator successfully completed a 3B operator training on, let's say, a Skyjack SJ4045 self-propelled boom lift today, that the operator should be expected to operate a different manufacturer's 185-foot boom lift tomorrow? Are they knowledgeable in the setup and operational differences of that 185? And are they physically and mentally capable to operate that particular MEWP? Have they successfully demonstrated their ability for the user or employer to assess them as qualified to perform the task? The primary objective of the NCSA-IA A92.24 and the CSA B354.8 training standard is to establish training requirements for the use, operation, inspection, testing, and maintenance of mobile elevating work platforms. So there is specific language and comprehension requirements when training MEWP operators. Users must ensure that training is presented to their employees in a manner that they can understand. This means the training material must be delivered at a level and a language which is appropriate to the student or students to ensure quality learning and maximum comprehension. When using mobile elevating work platforms for training programs, it is a MEWP operation, and you must conform to all the requirements of the MEWP specific safe use plan, as instructed in A92.22 or B354.7, the safe use standard, just as you would be required if you were on a customer or a construction job site. So starting at the top of this illustration, what you need to do is you need to make sure that you perform a site risk assessment to identify hazards, evaluate risk, develop control measures, and communicate with affected persons. Consider the selection, provision, and use of a suitable MEWP and work equipment associated with it. Consider the site access, preparation and maintenance of the site as required to include an assessment that the support surface is adequate to support the weight of the MEWP. Only trained, authorized, and familiarized personnel are allowed to operate and or occupy the MEWP. You need to verify the MEWP is in compliance with an annual inspection and is inspected and maintained prior to use. Qualified persons to monitor supervise, and evaluate operators on a regular basis. Inform the operator of local site requirements and warn and provide the means to protect against identified hazards in the areas where the MEWP will be operated. Ensure a process is in place to prevent unauthorized use of the MEWP, and the safety of others is considered within and outside of the immediate training area. Ownership, frequent annual inspections, pre-delivery, training, and familiarization documentation is retained for at least 4 years. So this is my portion. I'm now going to turn it over to Bart, and he will continue the presentation. Bart, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lee. Okay, so Lee did a really great job of highlighting the importance of standardization. Really appreciate that, Lee. So what people look for next after they've understood the importance is guidance on how to proceed next. So the best way to get guidance is obviously to follow the standards, and ANSI and CSA do a great job of providing very detailed guidance on administration of training, documentation of training, and just overall best practices. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is some of those recommendations in the standards. The training delivery consists of theory and practical. That's very important to note that it cannot be just a classroom or an online training, and it cannot just be a familiarization with the piece of equipment on its own. The two of them work very closely hand in hand to complement a good training program. Something to note that's in the new standards is the recognition of online training as a valuable way to achieve theory content now. So that's something that is new, and it's helping a lot of organizations out with efficiency, because there are benefits to that. So we'll look at that today. And so there is, remember, there's supervisor training as well, and the supervisor training does actually only require theory knowledge, theory training in general. There is no practical component. There's also occupant instruction we'll talk about today that is considered informal training, and it is the responsibility of the operator in the platform to deliver that. So we'll look at that. So in the classroom, they do talk about 25 specific topics of knowledge in the training standard, and it does tie neatly into the safe use standard. So I'm not going to go over all 25 topics of knowledge, but classification of the machines is very important, as well as the new nomenclature and terminology. We talk about the importance of manuals, inspections, all the different types of inspections that are required, and how the operator plays a role in that. Definitely identifying the hazards, but not just the hazards of the machine itself, but the hazards of the work site and the task at hand. And there's also an inspection of the work site itself to identify hazards and how to do route walks. Definitely a lot of emphasis on rules, laws, and standards, so your local laws as well as the standards themselves. And safe use in general, there's a lot of guidance for all the known hazards and how to protect against them. So there's a lot of information there, a lot to cover, and Lee did talk about the guidance, talking about 3 to 6 hours of training is the recommended amount of time allotted. You'll be hard pressed to cover all of the content in a 3-hour course. I'll attest to that. A good thorough program is what you're looking for, and the guidance will help you out with that. So some of the benefits of in-person training: you obviously get a personalized approach, and you have someone there in front of you that's able to answer your direct questions and give you immediate feedback. It's good because you also have other people in the room with you, so it's great for networking with others and sharing your stories and experiences. And it's a lot better for engagement, so you're not alone in front of a computer, and it's much more engaging, and it gets your attention more. I know sometimes folks, when we're working on a computer for a long period of time, we can be distracted by other things, so it's very good and engaging that way. There's a lot of efficiency as well of being on site already and being able to complete your practical in the same day. So big benefits there. When you look at online delivery, we don't want to bash it. It's got its own benefits. So there are those same 25 topics covered. Nothing changes there. The curriculum is the same. You do have 24/7 availability. So you could be a night owl. You could, you might have more time in the evenings. Your day might be completely booked solid, and you don't have any time to ever get away from your job and do some training. So you have the flexibility there. You can also log in, start the training, and complete it in chunks. That's a really, really beneficial part of the online training, is it doesn't have to be all completed in one shot. We do see higher retention rates through online training, and also it also gives you the ability to not have to travel or leave the office. And in these days where a lot of us are working from home, that can be very, very beneficial. So it is good to have that secondary way of getting theory content recognized now. You will have to book your practical, of course, because that is in person, and that can be done separately. Usually there's some sort of a timing guideline from the time you finish your online training to when you should have your practical completed. So looking at the practical, when you're at the site and you're ready to do your practical evaluation, it does not revolve just around the equipment. So there is a lot of talk about work site itself and looking around and doing a route walk. And in your practical, you have to demonstrate the ability to be able to recognize some of the hazards and how they are being controlled. And if they're not being controlled, coming up with ways to control them yourself, because many operators do face that in their day-to-day work lives. They don't have someone there with the ability to control all their hazards for them, so they have to be able to identify and control them themselves. So there's obviously the overview of the controls, how to park the machine and set it up, the importance of manuals and decals. So decals and stickers on the machine are just as important as the manuals, so we definitely go over that a lot in the training, and operators have to demonstrate that for us. Familiarization is a very important word in the new training standards, and it's been around, again, from the industry best practices for a while now. And the familiarization of the machine is important in terms of the specific model you're training on. The training itself is very general and generic to MEWPs in the industry, whereas the familiarization portion, you learn how to familiarize yourself with a specific model using the manual or an experienced operator guiding you. And then you can demonstrate that, because you will have to have that very important skill when you enter the workforce as a trained operator, to be able to familiarize yourself within the classification that you have been trained on. So it's very important to know those, demonstrate those skills, and again, there is a testing process both in theory and on the hands-on practical that a person has to pass in order to get their MEWP license. Occupant knowledge, we just want to touch briefly on that. This is a new introduction in the training standards now. So there's guidance, very detailed guidance on what an operator should be briefing any occupant in the platform with them on. So fall protection, stability factors, any accessories that may be used that are manufacturer approved and are being used that day. The site-specific procedures, that's obviously very important. Hazards and their avoidance, and how some of the controls that are in place. So, and also being able to spot hazards if the operator doesn't see something. General knowledge of the controls. So this is an important one. A quick briefing on how some of the controls work. The occupant is not authorized to operate the equipment. They're not a trained operator. But what we do see now in the standards is wording that you can demonstrate emergency lowering controls, so that if you, the operator, become incapacitated, the occupant can jump into action. In the hierarchy of rescue, the primary form of rescue is self-rescue, or someone in the platform bringing the machine down so that the person in distress can be helped by EMS quickly. And an occupant that knows how to emergency lower the machines is really the best way to achieve that. Manufacturer's warnings and instructions are important. So there's always a nice big decal in the platform with all the things you should not be doing with the piece of equipment. And going over those nice red circles with the lines through them with the occupant is very important as well. So supervisors, as a supervisor, we're not scot-free here. We do have to have knowledge. So this person, or I should say this role in the new standard, is very important, and it plays a very, very big role. This person must monitor, and they must observe the operators. And what are they monitoring for? Compliance with the standard. So first and foremost, supervisors must be knowledgeable and trained on the information in the standards, the best practices. So that's the last bullet point. There are rules, regulations, and standards, and a large portion of that training does revolve around all of the guidance and best practices in the standards. That's very important. But it is important for them to know how to select the correct MEWP for the job, so that they can identify if the incorrect machine is available for use. There's known hazards that can arise from that, and they can prevent that right out of the gate. Potential hazards and the means to control them is another thing. So operators must know that, but supervisors need to know it and periodically monitor and watch for those things, make sure that they're in compliance. And supervisors also have to know the manufacturer's recommendations. So a good trained supervisor knows the manufacturer's specific model and has read the manual and understands the manufacturer's specific recommendations for each model that's being used on their site. So some of the ways to get that information outside of the training, unfortunately, there's some reading involved here, and I can attest to doing a ton of this reading myself. In fact, several times over. I find that's best for retention. But understanding your local occupational safety and health regulations, so that could be OSHA in the US, CCOHS in Canada, and your specific state or provincial guidelines. Always be well versed in that, of course. That's first and foremost, so that you're in compliance. Definitely, get yourself a copy of the standards. So where the full standard is not available, the manual of responsibilities in the platform manual box supplied by the manufacturer is a great way to get that information as well, and it's already included with the machine. And of course, reading and understanding the operational manual of the specific MEWP, as we mentioned. That includes the safety labels. So evaluations, retraining is talked about in detail as well in the new standards, and it starts with evaluation. So somebody should be constantly monitoring, right? So we have that supervisor or someone else designated by the user. Sometimes there's a trainer on site, on staff, and they are the ones monitoring. So what they're looking for is monitoring again, for compliance, supervising the activities, evaluating the performance, ensuring the proficiency, and of course, if the performance is not to standard, coaching and correcting. So when I look at retraining, the standards talk about the expiration of training. So when you get training from a training provider, usually the expiry period is anywhere from 3 to 5 years, and that's what we've seen typically in the industry. That being said, a specific training provider can basically, in the US, they can dictate their training expiration period, and in Canada, in the CSA standards, it does max out at 5 years. Also, if the person observing and monitoring the operator sees a deterioration of performance, that's another good reason to put them through some retraining. If they haven't operated for an extended period of time, this is a big one. I've seen this. I've seen people come back for training, and the last time they operated a piece of equipment was in their last training session. So you have to be honest with yourself as an operator, and we teach that, and the standards talk a lot about that as well. If there's not a lot of operation for an extended period of time, it's a good idea to get retraining. Anytime you're introduced to new MEWP technology, it's a good idea to go for some retraining, and that can include simple detailed familiarization as well. And of course, if the operator has any accidents or near misses, that's always a great idea to get some retraining. So we're going to look at training administration and cover some of these bullet points here. The standard does go into detail on this. So Lee also touched on the importance of the qualifications of a trainer. So look no further than the standard and, of course, the industry best practice, which we'll cover both. So a trainer has to be able to select the correct MEWP or know how to select the correct MEWP, has to have experience with the MEWP, has to have, operational experience. No better way to train somebody on a piece of equipment than, of course, to be able to operate it yourself. Definitely have to know the regulations, rules, laws, and standards. Have to read through the manuals. You got to know your equipment inside and out. You got to know the hazards, the risks, the controls, and just in general, the best practices. So there's a lot going on in the trainer qualifications, and the standards go into detail again about that. But it doesn't stop there, because if you do look at the industry best practice guide, there is a section for trainers, and it actually goes a little bit more into detail. So things like communication skills, some of the attributes and qualities and knowledge. So under knowledge, some of the things that are not in the standard is knowing the consequences of improper use. A good trainer will definitely have that knowledge and be able to bestow that knowledge upon their students, and having a good safety record. It does mention that. So that's an important thing too. Users, employers, when you're selecting trainers, you want somebody who is safety conscious, safety minded, and has a good safety record. So that's good that that's there in writing. And under communication, which in general is important, you have to have acknowledgement from the operator, someone who's able to have a good two-way dialogue and acknowledge that the operator is actually retaining the knowledge and ensuring understanding by the audience in general, whether in your classroom or at the equipment. And under qualities, this best practice guide actually mentions some important qualities. So the person has qualities like being a safety advocate. So this is what you're looking for if you're hiring a trainer, or if you're putting someone through a training course to become a trainer, that they're already a safety advocate. They're safety conscious and safety minded. They can read the audience, they can read people, they can communicate with people well. And of course, they have confidence in front of groups. And an important quality is that they're honest. When no one's looking, we want good, honest trainers that follow through with the standards and make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to do and are being evaluated properly. Lastly, continuing professional development is important. So your training, your knowledge, your experience doesn't stop. It continues forever. So as a trainer, the best practice guides, the qualities and the skills and the attributes that they talk about, it doesn't really have a finish line. It's a lifelong journey, and you just continue learning. There's always something new and something changing in the industry, and you want to stay on the cusp of it. And taking webinars and seminars and training sessions and just staying current, as well as continually training and using your skills, is important to staying relevant. The training environment is talked about in the standards, so it goes into detail about the importance of the classroom. You can't just be in a dingy old dark room. You should have, good lighting. There should be good, you should be able to hear everything properly. You should have a good clear projector or television screen. The temperature of the room should be adequate. It shouldn't be too hot or cold. When you're outside in your practical, you definitely want to be free of risks and hazards. So you want to have an area separated from the actual any type of work operations, and that involves cordoning things off, coning things off, roping things off, and just keeping the general public in general out of your work area. So testing is important, as I mentioned earlier. So the theory test, there is guidance in the standards under the appendices. So you'll see Appendix A, and it actually just talks about some of the things, some of the topics that should be covered to demonstrate proficiency in the operator's theory knowledge, because you do have to verify their knowledge, and that's where the test comes from. And it does talk about the documentation, the importance of documentation. So one of those ways we achieve documentation is through a theory test on paper that's kept and filed on record, showing that the operator has in fact retained the knowledge. So there's also testing as far as the practical is concerned. And again, there is an appendix in the standards that gives you guidance. So there's otherwise no specific guidance on the practical criteria other than the appendix, which it is informative, but it's definitely recommended to follow, at least model your training practicals off of this appendix. And it has to be, again, evaluated by a qualified trainer, so that's important. And the way that the standards word the practical evaluation is to operate the machine for a sufficient period of time to demonstrate proficiency. And that's a nice big chunk of wording there that basically means the qualified trainer makes the ultimate call through observation, and it should take as little or as much time as necessary for them to evaluate the person demonstrating those skills. And again, documenting this is so important. So having the test paperwork from the practical is another important part of this. So, and documentation and record retention in general, you do need proof of training. It's required, and it needs to clearly identify a few things. So, name of the training entity, the name of the trainer, classification of MEWP, date of training, name of trainee, expiry, of course. So certificates and wallet cards together are important, and the minimum amounts of information required are listed there. And for record retention, it talks about maintaining your training records for at least the period of time that the training is valid, And if you have familiarization records, so it is important to document the operator's familiarization history. And so if you do have those records, there is a recommendation there to keep those for at least 4 years. Okay, so that's it for me. I really appreciate everyone listening in on that. And I'm going to turn it over to Tony.
Tony, you're muted, Tony.
Okay, so I'll repeat that.
Yeah.
Thank you to both Lee and Bart for their great presentation on the requirements for the delivery of standardized training. As mentioned, we previously have had requirements for training. Today, we now have a training standard, and that training standard itself provides us with requirements for the ongoing use of how to deliver the training effectively in the marketplace. So it is critical that we all understand that this training is compliant with the guidance from or best practices from our industry standards. I'd also add to this that we have all of these series are being recorded, including this one. So anybody who is registered for this will be getting a link to today's presentation that you can use for future reference. And in addition to that, any other of our prior webinars have been recorded for use, which include elements like developing a safe use program. And we have our next one coming up June 24th, which is a component of a risk assessment, which is developing MEWP risk assessment safe work procedures. So while you can go over and say that we have a method statement, a control measure, such as staying 10 feet away from overhead power lines, a safe work procedure will give the details on how both the supervisor and operator will comply with that safe use procedure. So that's open for registration now, and I would recommend that you get that on your calendars as well. So at this point, we've concluded our presentation, and we would like to now open up to a few open questions that are coming in. We have one here. Nick is, as a safety director, the rental place leaving their hydraulic equipment in the air and under pressure goes against everything I have been taught about hydraulics, and also makes it very difficult for us to have our people lower them to the ground when not in use. So Lee, as a rental company, would you want to give a swing at that first? And then Bart, you can add in from a manufacturer's perspective on leaving aerial lifts elevated when not in use.
Certainly, Tony. Thank you. So, considering a best practice, if the machines are in an elevated position, every machine has a maximum wind speed indication of what the maximum wind should be that you'll utilize that piece of equipment in. If there was a situation where there was an elevated unit and an unexpected storm comes up, it happens to exceed the manufacturer's recommendation and it goes over, the best case would be that there would be damage to the equipment. the worst case would be if there was anybody present at the time that that piece of equipment went over. So it would be in my opinion, it would be a best practice for the units to be in a lowered and in a proper stowed position.
All right, Bart, you want to swing at that one?
Yeah, no, Lee did a great job there. From a manufacturer's perspective, I definitely want to always direct everyone's attention to referring to the manual of the specific model of MEWP for recommendations on how to park the machine. Now, that being said, obviously the question does reference rental places. We drive by rental places, we see machines in the air, and we know that they're conserving space. They have a lot of machines and they want to put them in the yard. So it's recommended that if machines are parked in the air due to necessity, that you treat it like any other MEWP task and you perform a risk assessment, identify the hazards involved in that type of parking, and put your controls in place. So that means protecting people on the ground and making sure that nobody can be hurt from a hydraulic failure, and definitely observing manufacturer recommendations. As Lee said, there is a wind rating, and if there's a storm coming or anything like that, it's your responsibility to then lower all those machines if there's an expected wind that's going to be higher than what's recommended. So I definitely agree with what Lee said.
All right, but thank you. I would also add that it is technically a element within the standard that does recommend that the machines are lowered to the stowed position when not in operation. So you have the consistency there, and as mentioned, while it may be a common practice for rental companies to do that, both our speakers have acknowledged that then a risk assessment must be taken in place. What is the risk of that being elevated and the consequences for that? And they have to address those in that operation. The next one was, and how about some help with making us all safer? I'm not sure that that's a statement, but there is a question mark on it. I don't know if either of you want to take a swing at that. I'll let you go first, Bart.
I'm not sure if that one might have been in reference to the previous statement above, as a kind of a follow-up question to making us all safer there. So I think that's what he might be referring to. Because otherwise, to make us all safer, that's why we're recommending to follow the standards, and we have the safe use and training guidelines, so that there's a clear, standardized path for everybody to take.
Okay. Do you want to give it a shot at that at all, Lee? You're muted if you're answering. I'll throw out there that from my perspective as chairman of Safe Use Standards, both in the US and Canada, our standards are very comprehensive that address every, I'm going to say, industry stakeholder in the safe operation of mobile elevated work platforms. You see the expanded reference within our standards now for occupants and providing them with occupant knowledge. You see now the requirement for the person who is supervising the MEWP operator to receive supervisory training. There's much more detail within the safe use requirements for users of mobile elevated work platforms, including coming up with a MEWP specific safe use program. So I do think that our standards are recognizing the fact that we need to do a lot more than just have operator training. And I would encourage everyone to get a hold of the Manual of Responsibilities from the Secretariat, SAI. You can buy a copy for about $8 and go through all the safe use and training requirements to get yourself up to speed. Another question here for the working at heights or fall training. Are there state or provincial requirements for approval in-person training, or can the fall protection component be completed fully online?
Tony, I'll take that one.
Thank you.
Okay, so yes, there are specific requirements in certain provinces or states that are very clear for fall protection in general. But when it comes to fall protection in MEWP, You do get the theory component, whether it's instructor-led or online, that gives you the general knowledge. It's very important that a qualified trainer covers the fall protection aspects in the practical evaluation and tests the prospective operator on their knowledge and their ability to look at, inspect, properly don the equipment, and obviously identify the manufacturer anchorage points so that they're properly attached. So there is very much a testing component in the practical as well that should be always performed, not just a theory component or online component.
Okay. Lee, you have anything you want to add? Not sure if you're muted, Lee, but I'm not hearing you, so I'm going to move to the next question. And this has to do with fall protection. Can we get consensus on the best way to tie off in a lift? The entire industry keeps disagreeing in the best way and be able to work. So many different standards and requirements, it's causing mismessage. I really believe SRL, self-retracting lifelines, are the best, but the Corps of Engineers specifically do not allow these in the EM 385. Being in restraint is not practical.
Okay, so from a manufacturer perspective, we don't have a specific lanyard type that we'll address in our manuals. We'll say specifically that if regulated and if required, you should be tied off with a full body harness and a lanyard. The rest relies heavily on risk assessment. So the standards and just running a MEWP business in general, or running a business that involves MEWPs in general, the user or the employer or the person in charge plays one of the biggest roles, and that role revolves heavily around assessing the risks before starting the work. And they do have to assess the best type of fall protection, including lanyard, for the task at hand. And this varies very much from DC electric scissor lifts indoors to rough terrain scissor lifts to boom lifts and the high ejection probability that you have in booms as well. So a lot of the regulations that I've seen in many of the states and provinces does reference protecting occupants from ejection. And so that unfortunately does involve restraint type lanyards. So you also have to pay really close attention to the height of the machine while driving or while moving. You might be stowed or low to the ground and still have a high risk of ejection. And in that case, restraint type lanyards are definitely recommended. As far as SRLs go, the jury's still out. There's some manufacturers of SRLs now that do promote safe use in MEWPs. So that's a very important statement they're making. So look for that. But there's also a very huge danger in incorporating the wrong type of SRL, the type that are designed for overhead attachment. We've seen those mistakes in our travels when we're training folks in the field, that they're using the wrong type of SRLs that it will not actually, are not tested to activate in these scenarios where you're attaching below the hip at the mid rail. So it's very important, and whoever the entity is in charge of the personnel and in the safety of the personnel, they're definitely going to be doing a detailed, thorough risk assessment and involving potentially some of the manufacturers like myself, some of the safety people, and the manufacturers of the lanyards as well.
Okay, next question. I'll give one more question over here. Which entity is responsible for keeping the training records?
So again, from Skyjack's perspective, we're looking at the standards. At minimum, you want to have the user, again, which sometimes is clearly defined as the employer, the person in care, control, and custody of the MEWP, to have their trained operators training records on site and available to be produced. That being said, a lot of other groups will keep the training records. For instance, myself as a training provider, we keep all the records as well. And again, it's for the duration of the training period at minimum, but longer is always recommended.
Okay,
So
well,
I believe
go ahead, Lee.
only thing to add there is, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that the record should be retained for a minimum of 4 years.
That is correct in the US, and it's a longer period of time in Canada. So I think it's for
Very good.
So I appreciate everyone's time today. You know, we've come to the conclusion of our 1 hour, which we we stay strictly on target with. So again, I appreciate our speakers today, Lee and Bart, for their great presentation. I add to our appreciation to Skyjack, our sponsor for today's event, for making today's event possible. Like we have recorded this session. All of you will be getting a link to that who have registered for this course. And for those who haven't registered, all of these are available on the IPAF website. Looking at future events, you can go to our website, www.ipaf.org/events, to look at registering for any other events that we have. And I'm going to conclude by thanking all of you who have registered for our events, for investing your time to listen to our presentation today. So thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you.